So now we want to go ahead and change the output text. And I mentioned that there were some complications here. Let me show you. So I've gone to spot.pcc.edu/tilde/m-goodman/developer.android.com, and I'm going to search for fragment. And then under guides, you'll see fragments. So I'm going to click on that. And then if you scroll down to here, you'll see a fragment lifecycle. So last week we talked about the activity lifecycle and everything from when the activity is created, when it gets started, when it gets resumed and paused and destroyed and all that other stuff. And fragments have a lifecycle too. And the bottom line here is that just creating a new instance of a fragment object just puts it at the very beginning of this life cycle. And the view that's part of the fragment isn't actually available until you get all the way down here on Create View. And so if I create a new instance of the output fragment and then try to access the text views for the amps and the watts, they don't actually exist yet. So let's go ahead and take a look at our code. So here is where I create the new output fragment. The view doesn't exist yet, so I can't actually get the amp text and the ohm text. What I need to do somehow is I need to wait until somewhere in here, some point here in the activity lifecycle, and then those views will exist and I can set the text. So here's what I'm going to do. At this point, I know volts and ohms. I'm going to tell volts and ohms to the output fragment, and then when the output fragment hits the right point in the life cycle, then the output fragment is going to go ahead and change those texts. So the first thing I want to do is add a method to output fragment so that I can tell it volts and ohms. So let's go ahead and create a public method, void set values, and it's going to take float volts and float ohms. And this is public because I'm going to be calling it from my main activity. And then what this is going to do is just save these values so that I can use them later. So I'm going to create private member variables so that I can save these values. Private float and volts, and private float and ohms. And then in this method, I'm going to set m volts equal to volts and m ohms equal to ohms. So set values is just telling the fragment to remember the values, and then I'm going to call that in my main activity right here. So after I've created the output fragment, I'm going to call the set values on it, and I'm going to pass in volts and ohms. So now my main activity is telling my output fragment what values to use in the calculation. Then in the output fragment, I'm going to wait until somewhere in the activity lifecycle after onCreateView has been run. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this in onStart, which is after onCreateView. So anywhere after here the text views exist, I'm going to put it right here, onStart. And let's go ahead and get our previous code from output activity. And this is in the onCreate method, so I'm just going to copy all of this to start with. And I'm going to put that in an onStart method. So @override public void onStart, and then I'm going to paste in that code. And I'll take the imports, Okay, so I don't have an intent anymore because I'm just launching this thing. Volts and ohms I now have saved in M volts and M ohms. And then this calculation of amps and watts is the same. These should work now, except that find view by ID is a method on activities. And I'm not in an activity class anymore. I'm in a fragment class now. So somehow I need to get the root view for the currently running activity. And there's a method for doing that. So I'm going to call view is equal to get view. And then this view has a method, view dot find view by ID. Okay, so this gets the current view from the activity. This looks in that view to find output amps and output watts. Then this formatting is the same and setting the text is the same. And that should be it for this. Let's go ahead and see if it works. I'm going to go ahead and run the app. So I'll type 120 volts and 10 ohms and calculate. Oh, and I have an error. So let's go ahead and see what I got. So I'm going to make this a little bigger here. Oh, I didn't call the super method in my onStart. That's a mistake that I always seem to make. So let's call that super.onStart. Let's try it again. Okay, so 120 volts and 10 ohms, 12 amps, 1440 watts. Now, in the previous version of the app, I had a back button here, or I could use this back button. But now when I hit the back button, it doesn't take me to the input form. It just exits the app. And the reason is because there's only one activity here, and when I return from that activity, that exits the app. So what I really want to do is I want to be able to hit that back button and go back to my input form. So I want to be able to type 120 and 10 and hit calculate. And if I hit this back button, I want to return to the input form, even though it's the same activity. And the Fragment Manager lets you do that by setting something called the backstack. So the backstack is a list of prior points in your activities that you can return to by hitting the back button. And all you have to do to make this work is in your main activity, before you make a change that you want to return to. So here's where I replace the input activity with the output activity. At this point in my activity, I'm currently displaying the input fragment, and that's the point that I want to return to. So I'm going to add in my transaction, add to backstack, and then optionally you can give this a name. So I'll just go ahead and give it input form. You can even leave this as null if you want. So what this is doing is it's basically building into the Fragment Manager the state of the current activity before it gets committed so that I can return to that by hitting the back key. So let's go ahead and run that. So I'll type 120 volts and 10 ohms, calculate. Now when I hit the back button, it returns me to the input form. And let's go ahead and do 220 calculate 22 amps, back button, and so on. So now the back button is working the same, and I just want to point out one more thing about this. So you'll notice that I had this add to back stack before I replaced the content with the output fragment. And you might think that if I move this here, now when I hit the return, it would return to the output fragment. But that's not actually what happens. And the reason is because this is not actually committed yet. When I set the content frame to hold the output fragment, that doesn't actually happen. That change isn't actually made until here when I do the commit. So add to backstack input form should do the same exact thing whether I have it before or after this replace. So let's go ahead and run it again. It should do the same thing as before. So 110, 10, 11 amps, back, I return to the same point. 220, back, return to the same point. So bottom line is that this can be confusing when you're starting out because you think you're returning to the activity with the output form, but you're actually returning to the activity before this commit happens.